someone's getting into the air.
Would it make that?
Yeah. That was my first one. I didn't prepare it. Sweet. That was all off the dome, bro.
That's a recorded video. Why is there a root beer in here?
Is that everyone? Anyways, so I'm Ray. I'm lead engineer of Droidridge, and today I'm going to talk about 3D printing. So this is the standard kind of 3D printer you'll see, and this is called an FDM 3D printer. You don't have to memorize that. But then there's other kinds that are, Delta. There's belt printers. There's resin printers. There's metal printers. I'm not going to get into that. Yes. All right, yeah. I mean, there's some out there that are really, really cool, but I would say this is pretty cool. Anyways, so how this works, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it, is it uses molten plastic layer by layer, and it really precisely hits almost every corner of this printer. And so the software that is used for it, since it is basically these slices, it uses a 3D model and it cuts it up into slices to print layer by layer by layer. And generally, depending on how big your part is, it will be tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of layers, and that'll cause it to take a long time. I've had prints take over a week. The software that is used for it, this specific one is called a slicer, by the way. Hence, it's kind of self-explanatory. It slices a 3D model up into several 2D models. So this right here is the most popular one you'll see. It's made by a company called Ultimaker, and the software is called Cura. And these are just rudimentary settings right here. Of course, you need to get into more specific settings. And there's something called infill, and that's because these 3D printed parts are actually hollow, and there's still plastic inside of it, but it's in this pattern, and that's because you don't want to use too much of this. Again, it's around 20, depending on the manufacturer you get it from. It's around $20 plus for a standard spool or a standard kilogram of this certain type of plastic called PLA. It's the most common one we've seen. So you don't want to use too much of that. And so I'm just going to click slice on here so I can show you the preview of it. And another thing is the adhesion. When you're starting out printing, I would recommend you use a raft, just because you guys aren't really skilled in bed leveling, and I had that problem when I started out as well. And I'll get into bed leveling later. So here we can actually see the preview of that part, and each little line here, if I zoom in, if I zoom in, you can actually see the individual layers on there, and zoom in a bit more. So you can see each individual layer on there, and that is for reference how small they actually are. And think of these layers like a book, because they don't fully actually merge together. It doesn't make one solid part. Instead, it's a string that overlaps on top of each other over and over again for hours. So this will really affect the actual structural integrity of a part, because again, think of it like a book, where if you take a hammer to the cover of a book, whether it be soft cover or whatnot, you take a hammer to it, the book won't break, because all of those papers is just compressing together. But say you take like a big book like a dictionary, and the sides of those pages, say you take a hammer to it, all those pages will crush together. And that is how you should think about how a 3D printing part works. And so that's what engineers have to accomplish when they're planning on 3D printing a part, is to remain that structural integrity within that part. Another thing you see here in blue is something called these supports. As I mentioned before, it's molten plastic, and so gravity is going to bring that liquid down, and so obviously it can't print in midair, so there's supports holding it up. You also want to minimize on these supports because again, this wastes your food, and you don't want to do that. You want to conserve, and that also ruins the part since again, it's plastic that's merging together. What engineers have to think about is, especially when they're designing the part as well, is the best way they can make it printed. So right here, the best way to actually print this would be to have it on its side. So, just rotate it 90 degrees, and that eliminates any support. That also means that these narrow ridges right here won't be affected by those layer lines. It'll, because those will all be against it. Because remember, think of it like a book. And so this is the perfect way to actually print it. And that's what engineers have to actually accomplish when they're making something 3D printable. This is just one half. It's a case for a certain thing. I just pulled a random part that I have had downloaded for this demonstration. But say they merge both parts of the case, then that would mean that there's supports all within it and whatnot. And that's not what you want, and you want to limit on that. And so that's why they split it up. Now to talk about the, also with the slicer, there's many different companies that make it. I know Creality, which is the manufacturer of this printer right here, has their own version. There's ones for other companies like Prusa, Bamboo, things like that. So this specific printer right here was made by Creality. The name of it is a CR20. And Creality is amazing for budget printers. If you're wanting to get into entry-level printing, then I would definitely recommend, my personal recommendation would be to get a Creality printer. I got the Ender 3V2 as my first printer, and that really helped me learn how to do it. And this right here only cost $250. And to put that in reference, that is half of the cost of a PS5. So you could buy 2 of these printers instead of a PS5. I know I asked for one of these for Christmas a couple years back, and I've been using it ever since upgraded. But so this is just one company. Now there's other companies such as Prusa. They make generally better printers, but they're more on the expensive end. And then there's also Bamboo Lab. They make super expensive printers, but I would say those are the best on the market right now. But if you are looking for an entry-level printer, if you want to learn how to 3D print, rather than just click a button, I would recommend getting a Creality printer. Another thing is safety reasons. So obviously, when it's spewing out molten plastic, it has to get really hot. And even with this type of plastic, which is a lower temperature melting point, it's still 200 to 200, I'd say 15 degrees Celsius that you need to get to. And to put that in perspective, that's around 450 Fahrenheit, like the temperature of an oven on its highest temperature. So I would say that you need to be really careful, especially when touching this nozzle. So never touch this nozzle when it's on. And with the bed, it also gets heated depending on the kind of printer you have. Sorry, it was Tony. Yeah, I'm sorry. He's my and oh yeah, let me pass out some really cool parts. So here you look at it. Just pass them around and whatnot. And you can actually see right here, these are the layer lines and whatnot. This isn't that well, but yeah. So another safety thing is the actual bed is heated as well. Now I would say it is cool enough to touch. It gets around 60 degrees Celsius. It's not boiling point, so say it's like 120 Fahrenheit, 130 maybe. So it is safe to touch, but you don't want to be on there for a prolonged period of time, and you don't want to touch the actual heater itself, which is underneath there. I did that once in Berkeley. So you want to be careful with that, but I would say it's generally safe to touch. Now, when you buy a 3D printer, it will generally come with 2 types of bed levels. And the reason that it needs to be a level bed is because, as I mentioned before, I don't know if I did mention it, the default setting for the actual layer height, which is the height of each layer, is 0.2 to 0.12 millimeters. And so if it's off by 1 millimeter right here, that'll affect, 6 to 5 layers itself, and that'll definitely ruin it. And so that's why this particular printer came with an auto bed leveler. I know you guys can't see it, but this is a little probe that probes the bed. But then we installed these manual bed levelers right here that will allow us to do it. And so make sure that when you are 3D printing, you have a really precise bed level system. I know there's some fancier printers that manually will like automatically level the bed for you, and stuff like Bamboo Lab. I know Prusa has some printers like that, so does Creality, but with this kind of entry-level printer, you have to do it yourself. So make sure you are really precise with it. I know some people recommend putting a piece of paper under it, but that's still not precise. I've gotten to the point where I eyeball it and it works out, but some people aren't at that point. Another thing is to replace the nozzle every now and then. I know with the actual, what's the word? The amount that I use my printer on a daily basis, I don't use it on a daily basis, but I would say I like to replace my nozzle every 1 to 2 months. I'd say, depending on how often you use your printer, I would say you need to replace it every 1 to 3 months, depending on how often. Yes?
Where can you get a new nozzle? Like online?
Yeah, you can go to different websites. I know that you generally just look on Amazon. So the default nozzle that they'll give you, and what most people use, unless you're printing like a super special filament, is just a brass nozzle. And if you know anything about brass, it's kind of brittle, and so you do need to replace a brass nozzle every now and then, every couple of months, because it will wear down, and you will notice that part decrease in there. So make sure you
like 5 minutes.
All right, so make sure you replace your nozzle. But are there any questions? Yes? Now, depending on the size, it can take anywhere from, I would say, 40 minutes to hours, days even. I've had things take up to a week. But that depends on the size. Now, if you're, probably, one of these parts that are passed around here, I would say this maybe took what would you say, like 4 hours? Yeah, 3-4 hours, So they do take a while because again, it's tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of layers because each one is so insanely small. Any other questions? Yeah?
So what parts do you usually print for
So FTC.
The FTC.
So I know this was printed for FTC. I'm pretty sure, was it a battery mount? This is too small for battery.
It wasn't a battery mount, that was a thing for the slide.
Oh, all right.
That was last year, or year before last year.
All right. So I know this was a battery mount. So there's different things. I know for depending on what slides you use, you can print mounts for that, and just generally anything. I know intakes, outtakes. I know during like Freight Frenzy, I don't know if any of you were here for that, but people would have like print boxes that I'm actually pretty sure there's some